The morning of Flight 229 began like any other long-haul journey, families dragging suitcases, businessmen glued to their phones, crew members exchanging polite smiles as they prepared for another routine flight across the Atlantic. The air smelled of jet fuel and fresh coffee as passengers boarded one by one, unaware that the next few hours would test every beating heart on board. Inside the cabin, a 17-year-old boy named Ethan Cole settled quietly into seat 14A. His backpack was filled not with games or snacks like most teenagers, but with flight manuals, navigation printouts, and a small notebook covered in doodles of airplanes. Ethan had been flying simulators since he was 11. He had logged nearly 200 hours of real training with an instructor. Flying wasn't just a dream for him. It was his second language. A flight attendant paused beside him. "Traveling alone today?" "Yes," Ethan replied, tightening his seatbelt. "Heading home from flight school break." She smiled, thinking nothing more of it. But if she looked closely, she might have seen how Ethan's fingers traced imaginary throttle movements on the armrest, an unconscious habit after years of training. The engines roared to life, vibrations rolling under everyone's feet. As Flight 229 lifted into the sky, Ethan gazed out the window, watching clouds swallow the world below. He imagined himself in the front seat, hands on the controls, guiding the aircraft through air currents like a bird riding the wind. One day, he promised himself. For the first 3 hours, everything felt normal. Breakfast was served, passengers watched movies or slept, and the aircraft hummed smoothly across endless blue. Even the captain's occasional announcements sounded relaxed. But just past the midpoint of the ocean, something changed. It was subtle at first, a faint, sharp smell of fuel, like gasoline mixed with cold metal, drifting through the ventilation system. Ethan lifted his head immediately, nose twitching. He had smelled that exact scent before, during an emergency drill at training. Across the aisle, a woman wrinkled her nose. "What's that smell? Did something spill?" Her husband shrugged, unaware of the rising tension in Ethan's chest. Up front, inside the cockpit, Captain Harris leaned closer to the fuel gauge. His breathing slowed. A red light blinked steadily, almost like a heartbeat. "Fuel imbalance detected." He checked again, hoping it was a glitch. But the left tank showed levels dropping faster than expected. He frowned. "That can't be right." The co-pilot, First Officer Rodriguez, double-checked the readings, flipping through diagnostic screens. "No sensor failure. We're losing fuel, somewhere in the left wing." For a moment, neither spoke. A fuel leak mid-flight was one of the most feared emergencies, silent, invisible, unpredictable. Worst of all, they were flying over open ocean, far from any major airfield. The plane carried enough fuel for the planned route, but not enough to hemorrhage thousands of pounds into thin air. Captain Harris steadied himself. "We keep calm, follow procedure." Yet his fingers trembled as he adjusted controls, trying to slow the loss. Back in the cabin, Ethan watched a tiny vibration ripple through the wing outside his window. Not violent, but different. Wrong. He had learned to feel details most passengers never noticed. When the smell grew stronger, Ethan sat upright. Something inside him whispered, "This is real, this is dangerous." A few seats away, a baby began to cry. Flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances. They could smell it too. 10 minutes later, Captain Harris made an announcement, his voice measured but tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical issue with our fuel system. Please remain calm and seated while we assess the situation." The cabin fell silent. The baby stopped crying, as if even infants could sense fear. Ethan shut his eyes and ran through emergency procedures in his mind. Reduce altitude to minimize pressure differential. Adjust fuel flow. Divert to nearest viable runway. Control airspeed to limit structural stress. He opened his eyes again, heart pounding. "They need help." He tried to stay still, but his leg bounced uncontrollably. The idea burned inside him. Should he speak up? He was just a student. What if they ignored him? Or worse, laughed? But he remembered his instructor's words. A pilot's first duty is to speak when safety is at risk. Rank doesn't matter. Responsibility does. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt, breath shaking as he stood up. A flight attendant immediately approached. "Sir, please take your seat." "I think I can help," Ethan interrupted softly, voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through him. "I'm a student pilot. I've trained for fuel leak emergencies. Please let me speak to the captain." Her brows furrowed with worry. "We can't take passengers to the cockpit unless—" From behind, a man called out, "Let the kid try. Do something." Panic was starting to crack the cabin's calm. The flight attendant hesitated only a second longer before nodding. "Follow me." As Ethan walked the narrow aisle, dozens of eyes followed him, some hopeful, others skeptical, all fearful. He felt every gaze like weight on his shoulders, but he kept walking. The cabin door to the cockpit opened with a soft click. Inside, lights flashed across panels like warning stars. Papers were scattered, manuals open, tension thick in the air. Captain Harris turned sharply. "This is a restricted area. Why is he—" "He's a trained student pilot," the attendant explained quickly. "He asked to help." The captain studied Ethan, a boy, barely grown, but with calm, trained. "Sir, I know I'm young, but I've practiced these scenarios. If I'm wrong, send me back. But if I'm right, we might buy time." Focus in his eyes. Silence held the room for one long breath. Finally, Captain Harris stepped aside. "Show me what you see." Ethan moved closer, his fingers hovering above controls he had only ever touched in simulators. The smell of fuel was faint, but unmistakable inside the cockpit too. He analyzed gauges, traced tank pressure lines, inspected flow indicators, his training awakening like muscle memory. He pointed. "If we reduce speed by 15% and lower altitude gradually, we can decrease wing strain. It won't stop the leak, but it will slow the loss. And we need to divert. Fast." Rodriguez blinked. "Where did you learn that?" "Emergency simulations," Ethan replied. "I repeated them until I could do them in my sleep." Captain Harris met the co-pilot's eyes, then nodded. "Let's test his theory." As adjustments were made, the fuel gauge slowed, just a little, barely enough to notice, but enough to breathe again. Ethan exhaled shakily. The plane was still losing fuel, but now they had time. For the first time since the warning light appeared, hope returned to the cockpit. Captain Harris placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Stay here, son. We're not out of danger, but I think we just got our first chance." Outside, clouds drifted silently as Flight 229 continued forward. Not safely yet, but no longer helpless. And in seat 14A, a boy had just stepped into the role he was born for. The cockpit hummed with warning tones that reminded everyone of the danger still lurking beneath the steady surface. Though the fuel leak had slowed, it hadn't stopped, and time was slipping away like sand through fingers. Ethan Cole sat in the co-pilot's seat, heart racing, but eyes sharp and focused. He knew their survival would depend not just on knowledge, but on timing, instinct, and courage. Captain Harris stood behind them after handing Ethan the co-pilot's position. His voice was firm, steadying the air inside the cockpit. "Rodriguez, pull up diversion charts. Ethan, help him pick the nearest airfield with a runway long enough for a fully loaded aircraft." Rodriguez flipped open a map screen. A cluster of potential airports appeared, but most were too small, too short, too risky. Fuel leaked faster once descent began. They had to choose carefully. Ethan leaned in. "Avalon Air Base," he said, tapping the screen. "Military airfield, long runway, emergency ready." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "It's still a stretch. Crosswinds are reported strong, and we're heavy." Captain Harris took a breath. "We won't get better odds." He made the announcement to the cabin, voice steady but honest. "We are diverting to Avalon Air Base. Please remain seated with belts fastened. We are trained for emergencies, and we will land safely." Passengers exchanged frightened but hopeful glances. Mothers hugged children. Strangers held hands. A quiet prayer rippled through the cabin, not loud, not desperate, but steady, like a heartbeat. Ethan guided the aircraft through each adjustment, reducing airspeed, trimming the wings, compensating for fuel imbalance. The captain watched closely, not doubting the boy, but learning from him. A student pilot was teaching a veteran captain in real time, and not once did ego interfere. As they approached the coastline, clouds thickened, painting the view ahead in shades of grey. The world below vanished beneath layers of mist. Ethan stared out the windshield. "We need a clean approach. If crosswinds shift at the last minute, we abort." Rodriguez whispered almost to himself, "Abort with how much fuel left?" The answer sat silently between them, almost none. Alarms chimed again, fuel levels dropping to critical. The captain leaned forward. "No more time, bring us down." Ethan inhaled deeply. His hands rested on the controls, not trembling, not rigid, but balanced, like a violinist about to play. Reducing throttle, adjusting pitch, beginning descent. The aircraft tilted downward, nose cutting through dense clouds. Rain lashed the windshield in streaks, wipers sliding frantically. Turbulence bumped them like unseen hands pushing from below. Rodriguez checked radar. Crosswinds at 11 knots and rising. Ethan nodded. "I can work with that." But as altitude dropped, winds increased to 15, then 17 knots, strong enough to shove the plane sideways. The captain gripped the back of Ethan's seat. "Stay steady, son. Feel the wind, not fight it." Ethan angled the nose slightly into the crosswind, countering drift. His voice was low, almost calm. "Crabbing into the wind, compensating for yaw." The plane responded slowly, heavily. Engine noise deepening as the wings cut through turbulent air. Passengers gasped as the aircraft shook. A young girl clutched her teddy bear. An elderly man whispered a prayer. One passenger muttered, "God help us," while another replied, "He already did. Look who's flying." Through the thinning clouds, the runway appeared, long, dark, slick with rain. It looked impossibly narrow from the cockpit, like a thread dropped across the earth. Rodriguez announced, "Avalon Tower has cleared us for emergency landing. Runway lights active." The rain hammered harder, wind screaming. Thunder rolled somewhere distant. This was no calm landing, this was a fight. Ethan lowered the flaps gradually as they descended. Too fast, and they'd overshoot. Too slow, and they'd stall. There was no room for error. "Altitude 300 feet, Rodriguez said, voice tight. Fuel alarms shrieked again. Critical fuel shortage. Captain Harris whispered under his breath, "Come on!" Ethan's heart pounded, but his breathing slowed. Every second felt like a lifetime, but he didn't waver. Trust the plane, trust the wind, trust yourself. Come on." 50 feet, Rodriguez called out. Ethan straightened the nose, holding the aircraft steady against the crosswind, hands moving with delicate precision. Hold, hold. The wheels hit the runway hard, bouncing once then slamming down with weight that rattled bones. Tires screeched, sending up sparks as brakes engaged. The plane skidded sideways, nose dipping, but Ethan corrected instantly, rudder controlling the slide. Passengers screamed, then fell silent as the plane slowed. Stopped. For a full heartbeat, no one moved, not in the cockpit, not in the cabin. Rain drummed the fuselage like applause from the sky. Rodriguez leaned back, tears gathering in his eyes. We made it." Captain Harris exhaled so hard it sounded like a sob. He placed both hands on Ethan's shoulders. "You didn't just help, you saved everyone." Ethan swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I just did what I was trained to do." The captain smiled. "Training gives skill. Courage gives action. You had both." When the cabin doors opened, emergency crews rushed in, but the passengers filed out safely. Some touched Ethan's shoulder in gratitude. Others embraced him. A small child handed him the teddy bear for luck. Outside, reporters gathered by the gates hours later after hearing what happened, but Ethan didn't search for cameras. He walked alongside the captain toward the airfield hangar, watching mechanics swarm around the leaking left wing. Captain Harris stopped, turning to him. "Ethan, some people fly because they enjoy it, others because it's a job, but a real pilot," he rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder, "is someone who carries lives with responsibility, not pride. You proved that today." Ethan looked at the massive aircraft behind them, rain dripping from its wings like sweat from a warrior who had survived battle. "When I get my license," he said quietly, "I want to fly responsibly, not just skillfully." Captain Harris smiled. "You already do." Later, as the sun broke through the clouds, Ethan stood alone for a moment on the runway. The wind was gentle now, brushing against his face like a reminder of danger survived, of a future waiting. He closed his eyes and made the same promise he'd made years ago. But now it felt heavier, stronger. To fly is to protect. He opened his eyes, gazing toward the horizon. One day he would return, not as a student, not as a helper, but as a pilot in command. And everyone who had been on Flight 229 would always remember the day a 17-year-old took control and delivered them safely home.